I'm John Batchelor. My colleague and co-host, Thaddeus McCotter, WJR, the great voice of the Great Lakes, joins me. Thaddeus, a very good evening to you. Mrs. Clinton was in attendance at the Iowa State Fair over the weekend with her husband, former President Bill Clinton, and the retiring Tom Harkin of Iowa. The seat is open. And appearing before the major media, can we fairly now say that Mrs. Clinton, announcing herself, Iowa, I'm back, is a candidate for the presidency in 2016? Good evening to you, Thaddeus.
Good evening to you, John. Well, I think it would be conclusive if there is a photo out there of Ms. Clinton with the butter cow.
The butter cow, yes.
The butter cow.
At the Iowa State Fair.
Yes.
Iowa, of course, is the first caucus in 2016, and it is where Mrs. Clinton disappointed everyone in 2008, running against the now President Barack Obama. I mention this fact because now when we turn to a discussion of Benghazi, of the events of September 11th, 2012, just 2 years, it is important to note that this is both an historical investigation and because there is new war fighting with the Takfiri jihadists, some of whom were there in Benghazi that night, others of whom have now aligned themselves with the Islamic State. We're talking about men we're at war with, the United States of America at war with elements of the Muslim Brothers, at war with elements of Ansar al-Sharia, at war with elements of all the Takfiri jihadists of the Maghreb, the Al-Qaeda version, because they're converting or have converted to the Islamic State or their kindred of Cain. And we welcome now the author of a new book about the Benghazi events of 2012, Aaron Klein, and the book's name is The Real Benghazi Story, and I'll plunge right into it because Aaron's on the line with us. Aaron, a very good evening to you. Why was Chris Stevens in Benghazi, outside of the reach of the massive security at the Tripoli embassy? Why was he there that night? Why did he attend at such a critical moment? It was the 2-year anniversary. It was the anniversary, the 10-year anniversary of the 9/11 attack. Why did he attend at that moment? Why not the day before or a week later? Good evening to you, Aaron.
Good evening. Yeah, well, first of all, my information is that what was going on in the U.S. Special Mission in Benghazi, and it was so special that there was no American flag outside. It was so special that it was protected by the February 17th Brigade, which is an offshoot of Ansar al-Sharia, which took responsibility for the Benghazi attack. Is that allegedly there was some gun running going on to the rebels, first in Libya and then ultimately in Syria. But the question specifically, and Ambassador Stevens was involved in that, but the question specifically about what he was doing there that night, actually Gregory Hicks, who is the #2 deputy under Stevens, he testified that actually Stevens was up against a tight funding deadline. He says that Hillary Clinton wanted that facility converted from a temporary facility, U.S. Special Mission, that didn't even meet the minimum security requirements of the State Department, that she wanted to convert it quickly. In fact, in time for a December 2012 visit by Clinton, she wanted to convert it into a permanent facility. Now, apparently he would need to have conducted a very quick security assessment of the entire facility up against a September 30th deadline, very tight deadline. So apparently, at least Hicks says that part of his motivation, Stevens, for going there that night was to do the paperwork to convert this into a permanent facility. That, plus don't forget, actually, his last meeting was with the Turkish diplomat. Turkey, you and I have talked about this for 2 years now, was one of the main facilitators of the rebels fighting in Syria. There were many shipments of arms from the Benghazi port, U.S. coordinated with Arab countries, Arab cutouts. So between the funding deadline and then the U.S. shipments of arms and then a U.S. collection effort, by the way, of weapons that Stevens was involved in, I think all of these were factors in his visit during such a tense period, including on that day that you would think he would stay away from the compound, the one day jihadists are most motivated to attack 9/11.
Thaddeus?
Aaron, when you talk about the vetting or the State Department officials who allegedly went through these documents prior to their submission to Congress and other people, we saw in Roger Stone's book, Nixon's Secrets, where the argument Nixon made was, we do not want to do what happened with Alger Hiss. We don't want to cover something up, get the facts out. Is there someone in this tale that is actually trying to do the right thing? Have you run across anybody advising in vain, please, let's just get this out so we can find out what happened so it doesn't happen again?
First, actually, we have apparently a State Department official who just talked with Cheryl Atkinson, former CBS reporter, and he says that he saw some sifting of documents, very strange sifting of documents, after hours in the State Department's Foggy Bottom headquarters in the basement. I know that the CIA contractors who are there on the ground are furious about the situation. In fact, some of them have already spoken out. I know people in the Pentagon and the military have been asking questions about why U.S. air support wasn't sent that night. Why it's called the Unicom SIF, C-110, Special Force, 40-man force, available exists for the very reason of attacks like the September 11th, 2012 attacks. And yet, they want answers to why on that very night, the one night, 9/11, as I said, jihadists are most motivated. Why would a special force that is there to protect U.S. diplomatic facilities and respond to emergencies, why would they have been on a training mission in Croatia? And then why on the night of the attack was the command of this Unicom SIF switched in the middle of the night, in the middle of this emergency, from Africa Command to European Command? Questions about that, questions about, by the way, some shipments of weapons that were going through Croatia. So I know there are a lot of people at the mid-level in the U.S. military, people within the State Department who want answers out, who want the answers to come out. And I certainly hope that the Benghazi Select Committee asks the right questions to those and other officials in the coming days. And I guess we're going to see that actually on Wednesday.
Right. It begins on September 17th, the Benghazi Select Committee of the House of Representatives. What, Aaron, you're describing is more questions than answers. Mrs. Clinton has been very careful in her testimony these last years. You cite in your book how her colloquy with Rand Paul, who's now a presidential candidate. Was she very careful in her testimony and made it very clear that she has not misled her colleagues in the Senate or the House? She might not have answered all their questions, but there was no obvious misleading. What is your opinion?
Well, I don't know that that's the case. I've been in touch, in fact, many times with Senator Rand Paul about a specific question that he asked, and he also, I understand, believes that she may not have been fully telling the truth when she was asked about weapons shipments from Turkey. You and I were radio hosts, and so we know to pay attention to the voice. I was paying close, careful attention to Clinton's tone throughout the testimony. And then suddenly when she was asked that question, her voice raised and she said, she squeaked, really loud, to Turkey. And then she said she didn't know anything about it.
Let me read the quote from your book. Yeah. Rand Paul asked Senator Clinton, is the U.S. involved with any procuring of weapons, transfer of weapons, buying, selling, anyhow, transferring weapons to Turkey out of Libya? Mrs. Clinton answers, to Turkey.
That's right.
That's the moment. Senator Paul's question is extremely well informed. Is that correct, Aaron?
Indeed. And then she continues and she says she doesn't know anything about it. She'll have to take the question for the record and answer it at another period of time. Well, I am, in fact, forget about me. The New York Times has reported several times in 2012, 2013, that Hillary Clinton with General Petraeus were some of the originators of the concept of arming the Libyan rebels and then arming the Syrian rebels. My information is that Hillary Clinton, State Department Secretary of State at the time, that she was one of those who were coordinating the ultimate concept of arming the Libyan rebels and then arming the Syrian rebels. So I would find it very strange that her plan, which clearly was put into action, and by the way, at the time the White House was denying that they were shipping those arms to Syria, later they admitted to it, I would find it difficult to believe that she didn't know of these weapons shipments, including that massive shipment just days before from the Benghazi port. And also, by the way, questions about, she said in her book, she said in interviews, she didn't see the cables requesting security. It's not her job. Yeah, that might be true, but she personally, I found, signed waivers. Not her underlings, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton herself signed some waivers that would allow that facility to exist, including something called the co-location requirement, which allowed it to exist separate from the CIA annex, which was about a mile away. And ultimately, by the way, it was the CIA annex that was the quick reaction force that night of the attack. And if they were located in the same facility, maybe things could have been different. And she signed the waiver that allowed the U.S. Special Mission to be located in one place and the CIA annex in the other. And the Senate's 88-page report, by the way, confirmed this. So if you sign that without at least reviewing the security posture of the diplomatic facility, well, there can be questions asked in 2016 about whether that's negligence. I would go so far as to almost call it criminal negligence in signing waivers without reviewing the security posture.
One more question, Thaddeus. We've got about a minute and a half.
Yes, Aaron, in the past, I think when she was First Lady, Ms. Clinton said that she felt that she was channeling the spirit of Eleanor Roosevelt. Do you think there's a chance that in this instance with Benghazi, she's channeling the spirit of John and Allen Dulles?
I think in this case, she has a lot of questions that she needs to answer for with regard to not only why she signed those waivers, did she review the security, were documents held back from the State Department, but also about a lot of the claims that she made, like, for example, that the whole talking point scandal was people within the CIA she's largely blaming, when it turns out actually some of her people were key point men in scrubbing the State Department at the talking points of references to terrorism. So I think she has a lot of questions that are going to be coming up in the coming days in the Benghazi Select Committee hearings, and then ultimately in 2016. And Benghazi is a very real issue that continues until now. Arming Syrian rebels, arming Libyan rebels. Those rebels are now joining ISIS. Those rebels are now a huge national security threat to the United States.
The real Benghazi story, what the White House and Hillary don't want you to know, that is Aaron Klein is the author. He's on the line with us. He's here in the United States right now. Thaddeus McCotter, WJR, the great voice of the Great Lakes. All of these questions about Benghazi, they used to be archival. They're no longer that. They're part of the political conversation for 2016 because Mrs. Clinton is a candidate for the presidency. The Democratic Party is powerful. It owns half the Congress right now. It has a constituency that turns out in presidential elections. So when and if Mrs. Clinton becomes the nominee of the Democratic Party, I can say it is fair that she's probably the president. You get from the president what you get from the candidate, either transparency or duplicity. I'm John Batchelor.